Welcome, everybody, to episode 5 of the Reinsurance Podcast. My name is Jerad Lee. I'm the co-host.
You had to think about that for a second. My name is... Wait, what is my name again? And I'm Ben Rose. More confident of my name than ever. Only 7 letters, they say. Quite easy.
Yeah. It's not like those authors who had all manner of complex surnames.
Well, everybody struggles to remember your name, right?
Yeah.
It's Jerad, not Jared.
Yeah, it's...
Maybe we could use the podcast as a way to spread that good word.
Yeah. Well, starting off a strong tangent again, which is the way we do it. Strong tangents are the reason we inadequately described reinsurance in the last episode.
Yeah, this is funny. So this episode is not about what is reinsurance as a whole. No. However, Cordy has told us that we did such a bad job in the last episode of explaining what reinsurance is, that we each have to try and attempt to just do a good job describing reinsurance in like a sentence or two, and with an inspiring example of reinsurance in action as well.
In our defense, I think it highlights the complexity of what this is. Like it's actually really hard to describe super concisely. I will go first and give it my best shot.
Okay, wait, hang on, because I have, as usual, a prop. And listen, if you can't see this at home if you're just listening, but I don't know what this is called. Do you know what this is called? I've got a clack. I want to say, that's the noise it makes. It's an onomatopoeic version of how you say it.
The movie sort of start scene clipboard with the clacker on it.
Exactly. Well, I've got one of those, and it means that just before Jerad talks, there'll be like a beeping noise where it goes like...
One of my close friends in the US works in the film industry and would just be like killing herself the fact that she doesn't know that I don't know what this is called.
You've let her down.
No, I know.
No.
Yeah.
Oh well. All right. Oh,
clapperboard.
There we
are. Clapperboard.
Clapperboard. Thank you, Cordy.
Save.
Yeah. Wait. Hang on. I've got to do the clap. Don't stop. Wait. Oh, it's stuck. Hang on. It's quite difficult to operate. I say that it's not. It's a small toddler could operate.
Is it magnetic?
A tiny bit, I think. Anyway, okay. Here goes. My first ever time using a clapperboard.
And go. I'm ready. So reinsurance is a transaction that happens between normally 3 counterparties. You have the cedent, which is an insurance company. You have their broker, who sort of supports them in the purchasing of what their reinsurance is going to be. And ultimately the reinsurers, which are the companies assuming the risk. Is sort of a really high-level example of how it works. If you look at an insurance company that writes a lot of homeowners business in the southeast of the United States, every year they go with their broker to buy reinsurance in case a really bad catastrophe happens, for example. Every single year that they do this, and they pay their premiums the same way we pay our insurance premiums to their reinsurers. And then you have a really terrible disaster like Katrina, and all of these homes get damaged, all these families get sort of destroyed and sort of left out and have this sort of quite significant hardship. And the insurance companies are able to come in and support those people and rebuild homes and rebuild communities because the reinsurance companies give them the additional capital needed to do so. So a lot of times in those sort of really terrible examples, the checks that an insurance company is giving to their policyholders is from the support of the reinsurance company, sort of giving them that additional money in order to do that. But at its core, it's designed to help rebuild entire communities and allow an insurance system to exist so people can take risks. They can, go out and not rely on sort of having to rebuild with cash because the insurance mechanism exists because of reinsurance. That's my blurb.
Nicely done.
Am I clackering you?
Yeah, you get to clack at me now. I've got to try and compete with that.
So, Ben's turn.
I love that sound. So, Jerad gave a really good description there of reinsurance saving the day, but I think it's really important we also think about reinsurance as enabling the day in the first place. So, reinsurance basically makes it possible for insurance companies to offer products where they don't really know whether they can afford to pay the claims, putting it as it is. So, for example, things like the Olympic Games, so many ways that could go wrong, for the athletes involved getting injured, for, all sorts of really horrible things to think about, like terrorist attacks or gas explosions or weather disasters. We had the Rugby World Cup in Japan, for example, a while ago that got interrupted by a typhoon or something. A normal insurance company is not by themselves going to be willing to insure the Olympic organizing committee for these sorts of massive scale events. However, if they can find a partner in the form of a reinsurance company who says, we will pay this proportion of your claims for you, or a whole panel, because it's often done on a panel basis of several reinsurers who all agree to take a share of the risk between themselves, then suddenly you can start to really do big and ambitious things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. So reinsurance for me is the way in which you can take very big leaps forward as a society, as a community, etc., knowing that you've got a safety net, basically. So it's that big, happy safety net of joy. Reinsurance, the happy safety net of joy. But yeah, there we are.
We should
had a
run
gay
TV commercials for reinsurance with beautiful imagery and.
Did you see the hashtag that Jason came up with on? We were publicising the first comments.
Deal with it?
Deal with it. Yeah, it was brilliant. Speaking of commercials, because Supersede is a product where you can do reinsurance deals. Yeah. I think somehow he came up with this new slogan, which is Supersede, deal with it, which is clever, right? It makes sense.
It is clever.
It is quite literally what you can do with it.
Yeah.
You can make reinsurance deals.
But this episode isn't about what is reinsurance. We've covered it in depth, and we'll continue to talk about it in nuance. I think what we want to chat about today a little bit was in our industry, as people sort of have had this mandate to innovate and mandate to modernize the underlying way they do their business, diving into, do they build technology, do they buy technology, and how do companies think about this and why?
Yeah, and I think it's worth reflecting back on a comment you made a few episodes ago around ecosystems as well. So as background context, we're in an industry that's been around for ages and has largely thrived prior to any technology coming along. So when it became possible, and I'd go as far as to say totally necessary based on client needs to start ingesting and using and tracking data and responding to regulation and all sorts of other things, suddenly all these insurance companies and reinsurance companies and so on, who'd done things the same way for a very long time, were confronted with the challenge of, we need to start using digital technologies. What does that mean for us?
Well, and I think, again, you mentioned in one of the previous episodes sort of the boisterous brokers out selling their wares and quite skeptical underwriters sort of trying to interrogate this. As we modernize as a society, there's a bigger push by those underwriters to say, no, you have to give me more. Maybe a couple hundred years ago, me just telling you this is how it works was enough. But there's this knowledge now that the data does exist, and there's a reliance on you having to sort of prove that this is in fact the way a program works, or how much business you've done, etc. So the industry has always been quite forward on adopting technology to help evidence this more, help understand what they're doing more, underwrite risks better. Ultimately, I think if they do that well, it benefits the end customer. Like, we're able to bring, the better they understand the risk, the better they can price it, and the more the price comes down because they have a much clearer understanding of the risk that they're taking on. But for a very long time, there hasn't been technology that is equipped specifically for those needs, and everyone's today or historically gone out and invested in building stuff themselves, or partnering with huge technology companies, an IBM or big consultancy firms, to build them something from scratch based on the unique needs that they have as a business, because there was no alternatives to what they could go out to they couldn't go to it online and get new technology in the way they can today.
Yeah, indeed. And I think part of the interesting dilemma that maybe we won't focus on too much on this episode is the legacy that's created as well. Now you see what feels like entire conferences dedicated to how to escape from your legacy IT systems, which is a real challenge, because these companies have gone, and again, I don't want this to sound like blame, if you're listening to this and you were the CIO or the CTO of an insurance company in the 80s and 90s, you did the best that was available at that point in time, because SaaS wasn't even a concept back then. But what happened is that these companies on a project basis, commissioned, whether doing it internally and building the software themselves, or whether, as you said, buying in somebody to build it for them. They built a fixed thing that they were then going to have to maintain over time themselves, and hope would be fit for purpose forevermore, effectively. And so found themselves in a position where they had to double down and double down and double down on green screen tech that didn't move with the times. And when you embed these elderly technologies into what are core processes and core systems of record, and the way that everything your business does is tracked upon, it can be really hard to shake that off, and really hard to move forwards.
I think the difficulty in it stems from the fact that the way we pay claims and the process by which this all happens is oftentimes several years, or if we've talked about earlier asbestosis, and that like people are still paying claims sometimes decades later. So when you talk about shifting systems and retooling what you have, it can't just there is no sort of pull the bandit out, do something different. You have to bring everything that you have. It all has to go into whatever the new system is. So these are oftentimes change projects that take years to get everything from those old systems in, and even if those are sort of deals that are in runoff or claims that have been closed now, they could still be reopened. And there's all this sort of nuance that it's a really big piece of work where, most companies now, or most other industries, you could sort of rip out what you have. Everything sort of, those are the old deals. There's not this need to carry everything forward the way our industry has it, which adds a bunch of complexity to this type of project.
Yeah, totally. And I think we'll probably have to do an episode on this in general, but the complexity added by M&A, so technical term, mergers and acquisitions in our space, which are very plentiful and historically have always been very plentiful, has really accelerated the fragmentation that we nowadays see in most insurance companies and brokers and reinsurers, where because once upon a time most companies start off as a startup and a small group of people who have their way of doing things, and then often they end up getting merged with or blended with other companies. Because of this legacy problem, a lot of the times they just haven't been able to do it. So when you get confronted with, I don't know, let's say a French insurer and a German insurer agree to merge, typically outside of our industry, you'd make a call around either you're going to use the French one and migrate everybody over to that, use the German one and migrate everybody over to that, or replace them with something entirely new. But in our industry, it's always been the fourth option, which is keep both every single time. And so we keep on ending up aggregating and bringing together many, many systems to the point where for a major European insurer, different system in every country, and sometimes several different systems within a single country. And where they are trying to roll everybody onto the same system, they're often finding that the pace of rolling everybody together onto the same system is slower than the ongoing M&A activities that they had. We've had tons of conversations with insurers where they say to us, "Oh no, we're all good. Everything's on the new system except this one and this one and this other." And you're like, okay.
Yeah. When I started my career, I was heavily involved with Aon had just bought Benfield at the time. So Benfield being a very large European broker, Aon being a very large U.S.-centric broker. And I was really involved in sort of the data mapping between those two companies, bringing them all onto one system. And it was a several years long project because there was so much nuance, and all, even in the same geographies, they'd mapped companies differently and they'd mapped lines of business differently, and all of this stuff that they had to get to, what does a single source of truth look like? What is, what can we agree on here? And it was across dozens of countries and numerous systems. It's really, really, really complex.
Is this why you're so passionate about mapping?
Yeah, I do.
What is mapping for the people who don't know?
Well, it takes a number of forms. So ultimately, it's making sure that what you're aligning what one system says to another. So we use company mapping as a really good example, because you have it where do we all agree that this is the same company we're working with? Is when I say Munich Re, are we talking about the same thing? Because these are really big, complex entity structures. So making sure that we sort of point them all to the right space. Because when you take two systems and bring them together, if they've sort of organized their data differently, you have to point it to like, what is the new? Is it going to go from one to the other, as you said? Is it going to go to a newly created third point? So mapping is the exercise by which you sort of point the data from one and say, okay, this is now going to be called that, and you sort of pre-agree that. But even when we were consulting, this is like a really complex thing. There's no universal truths in our industry, right? The thing I think makes it interesting is everything is bespoke, even like geographies and how you categorize regions. Like every company has their own view of this.
Yeah, and I remember one of the really funny ones for this was the various mergers that AXA XL nowadays went through, where it sort of be trying to map all the entities together. You had Catlin in the old days was the one that was probably most prominent in the London market, that was then acquired by XL, which then meant we had to remap everything to take account of the fact that Catlin and XL were now the same company. And then AXA then came along and bought XL Catlin, which made it sort of this even bigger pile of entities. And there was a load of really entertaining history around deals made between those groups at historical points in time, especially in Switzerland. I think there's a tiny company called, I say tiny, it's actually pretty big, a company called Winterthur, which exchanged hands frequently between, I think, AXA and Catlin, or XL and Catlin beforehand. And then they all ended up part of the same company again. So there's poor folks all over the industry just trying to keep track of which companies or which entities belong to which companies. It's super complex.
And then you get really complex scenarios where one company might buy just the legacy Catlin book or something. So you've brought this all into one system. Then you're going to try to carve out what was historically the business of this one sub-entity that's being like. So you get all manner of this, which further adds to that. But so when you talk about trying to modernize this, and when there's no technology that exists out of the box, there's no toolkit that they can go get, the default has always been, well, we're going to try to solve our own needs and we're going to try to build something in-house. You're beginning to see a world now where tools do exist, right? And there's big tech companies, Guidewire and Duck Creek, and firms that have built like big back office solutions that there's an option now to say, well, that will be fit for purpose for us. And there's always a bit of customization that happens there. But there's still a bit of an interest from these companies to build in-house and be like, well, if that's not perfectly suited for us, we should just build this from scratch. And, we obviously don't think that's a very good approach. And
I realize for those hardcore reinsurance people that we love and trust around the industry, the topic of buy and build software is maybe not the most thrilling topic at times. So we've decided to make it thrilling by attempting to explain in the form of analogies.
The analogy competition once again.
Yeah, exactly. We're having another analogy battle. You may remember that I think I'm one up on the analogy battle, according to our esteemed Judge Cordy, where we had to describe the problem with reinsurance data using an analogy. Yeah. Which was, if you haven't caught up on it, where you're supposed to start watching Storage Wars. Yeah. For Jerad's analogy. But this time the analogy battle is to explain some of the challenges with building your own software or buying software, etc., what you should be thinking about as an insurance company, a reinsurance broker, or a reinsurer instead. Yeah. So,
I'll go first. I was egregiously accused of not having prepared my analogy last time, which may or may not have been.
Yeah, I was going to say, was there any truth in that? No.
But I think when I didn't want to use a technology example because I feel it's cheating. But when you think about how insurance companies use technology, it's evaluating whether or not this is crucially important to what they do as a business. And they're not technology companies. So the way I sort of thought about it was, where is there something that's profoundly important to a company, but yet not something that they should own the building and maintenance of it? And the analogy I landed on was Apple cheating on technology company. But when you buy an Apple product, like there's this famous like unboxing of Apple, and there's this experience around the boxing and the packaging and everything of Apple, but Apple doesn't manufacture their own boxes, right? They it's central to the experience that they want to give to their customers. It's central to what they deliver as a product, but they know what their core strengths are, and they're not a boxing manufacturer, right? They find partners and they work closely with them to get exactly what they want. But it would be, an insurance company building their own technology would be like Apple running their own sort of box making factories in order to have their own box. Like, it's not their core strength, even though it's important to them, right? That was sort of the one I landed on.
Love it. No, indeed, it's a good message that play to your strengths, remember who you are. Again, I think, although it's been tempting, I think, for a few companies to consider themselves, we are not an insurance company anymore, we're not a broker anymore, we are a tech firm. You're probably not. When you look at the skills and shapes and setup of a lot of tech firms, it is very different to the way in which we've very logically structured our insurance and reinsurance operations. They're quite different beasts. Right. So I guess it's my turn.
Your turn.
To compete with analogies there. So Cordy, remember to give Jerad a low score so that I've got a bit of a head start. The one I wanted to bring into play here was thinking a bit about infrastructure and thinking about, prior to technology or digital technology coming along, what was the key infrastructure for all these brokers, these underwriters, these buyers, etc. And typically that infrastructure actually took the form of buildings, as literally physical office buildings that were as close as possible to the people that they wanted to trade with. And I liken the software effectively to the modern building, right? So it's not nowadays necessarily about how close your building is to everybody else, is whether your software can talk to the people that you want to trade with itself, and how effective your software is at getting your deal placed or your deal underwritten, or whichever part in the chain you are. So I was laughing to myself at this analogy of imagining an insurance company looking at its colleague base and its staff base and saying, you know what, I don't feel like using one of the existing buildings in the city, so all you folks who are well-trained brokers or underwriters or whatever your role might be, you're going to very quickly upskill and learn how to build a skyscraper yourselves. So Dave, you're gonna do the foundations, are they called? Dig a big hole over there. Eleanor, could you pick up the?
She's doing the electrical wiring.
The electrical wiring, yeah. Exactly. I'm sure there's a wiring for dummies book you can use. Or we're only going to build this building once, but we're going to recruit 100 new people who are just going to focus on the build us a building project. You would never do this, right? You would never think that. You'd think, oh, at least I'm going to buy from somebody who's an expert. Mm. But ideally, you're going to go and rent some office space. Like a sensible human, you're going to work out where's good for you. You're going to agree a lease of some kind, and you're going to use that building, and it'll be great. Yeah. And they're responsible for taking care of it and making sure it's maintained. And you don't have to maintain a workforce of professional engineers, architects, builders, wiring people, all the things that go into a building that I have very little understanding of. But that for me was the sort of the thing that we saw happen after that point, kind of out of necessity, because there were no specific softwares to lease at this point. So all the insurers and brokers and reinsurers 20 years ago found themselves in the position of, oh, well, sorry, Dave and Eleanor, we know this isn't ideal and this is the last thing we want to do, but we're going to have to build it ourselves because Microsoft hasn't focused all of its attentions on, building a insurance-specific software for us.
I think the leasing or renting component of that also makes a lot of sense, because you build the building, you're like, building, done. and then there's some repairs that are needed. There's ongoing maintenance. And I think this is the same when they do the software is, oh, we thought that was then done, and there's sort of this rolling cost of maintenance. But if you're just renting it, it's like that someone else is doing all of that. All you're doing is paying your rent. And this is, I think, where SaaS has really come into its own as a technology solution. It's this sort of renting model where you pay monthly or yearly for it, and then that company who provides that is entirely responsible for making sure everything still works and it's all still going as planned, and it's upgrading and things are getting more efficient and improved. Like everything's sort of left to that company to make sure it's organized. And if people are unhappy with the way that this is being serviced as a building, they can say, well, we're going to take our lease elsewhere, because we don't think this is the service that we're getting at this skyscraper is what we expected.
Absolutely.
So it's an interesting analogy because it highlights the sort of behavior, the underlying behavioral elements that are also at play when you look at
and I think
model.
There's a really funny piece to this as well. So it actually, in that analogy, a reason why it's not perfect but does help to distinguish something versus the software world is because with buildings, actually the buy option is quite a legitimate choice. So we're saying don't build your own building. Typically if you want to get a building, that doesn't really make sense. Renting one, leasing one, brilliant idea. Buying one in the sense of buildings, maybe you're not an expert building buyer, but that's okay. At least, if you buy this building and you use it, you can sell it at the end. You've not lost out. If you need to get that money back, hopefully it won't depreciate too much. Now, when we look at software by comparison, if you buy in software, so you get a third party to come in and build you an amazing just for you software thing of some kind, you can't get to the end of a certain period and on your balance sheet have that software and say, oh, we need to raise a bit of funds, how about we sell the software? And there's not like a market for second-hand software where you can be like, oh, I'd love some of your spare software. It doesn't quite work in the same way.
So you're introducing a third concept then. We have build, buy, or rent being sort of the three options apparently, essentially now.
Yeah.
And I think that's right. Because you're exactly right. If you go away and you buy this thing, as you said, you can't turn around and sell that. Especially when in our industry, because if you build it so bespoke to you, it doesn't really work for anybody else. Funny, we were watching. Have you seen the Last Dance documentary on Netflix about Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls?
Oh, when you said The Last Dance, I imagined something completely different. I was like, oh, this is the soppy romantic way Jerad gets through his evenings. And then you're like, no, it's basketball. And I was like, oh, okay.
But the analogy I wanted to have was, so Michael Jordan, a famous basketball player in the U.S., built this mega mansion in sort of the suburbs of Chicago, entirely for him. Massive gates that has his number on it, and a basketball court with mass statues of him and all this sort of stuff. But now when he's trying to sell it, not a lot of buyers for a $25 million homage to his greatness. And I think it's the same kind of thing where in our industry, when people build their own tech, it's so bespoke to their exact and specific and unique way of doing something that the result is it's ill-equipped for literally anyone else. So if they go away and build something to scratch their own itch, they don't have an asset that they can sell on elsewhere. Sometimes this works out, right? And I think Amazon's a great example of this. As they were scaling their business globally, there was this huge reliance on their server costs, and they had to optimize how they built and managed servers around the world and everything else. And they recognized that there might be an opportunity for other people to leverage the excess server space and things that they had, and they spun up AWS, and that's now a massively profitable part of their business. But whilst it serviced their needs there, it was also agnostic enough to literally anyone who just needed cloud storage. That doesn't translate into our industry, right? You build something so bespoke to your way of processing claims and tracking accounting and managing your lines of business, and everything else is so nuanced that it's never worked. No one's ever gone away and said, well, Swiss Re built something, so Munich Re just bought that from them, and they both they've tried, but it's never really shown to be a successful model.
Yeah, no, it's a tough world out there, with no solutions available. Oh, wait. Are there now some solutions available, Jerad? Tell us more.
For reinsurance, there is.
Yeah, if you're a member of the reinsurance tripartite value chain, that is a reinsurance buyer, a broker, or an underwriter, Now there's a solution for you. Do you like my advertising voice? I'm working on it.
Yeah. there's another career in the work for you. I think it is. It's emerging. You're seeing, one, a willingness for the industry to make that shift and look at that, and then two, everyone aligning on what could we all use together. What is the model by which collectively people start moving towards sharing access to systems and tools that they can all have their own view of risks, but it's sort of agreeing and standardizing and bringing everything in a consistent way that they all benefit from, and that sort of passes along through the chain.
Yeah, and I think one of the really critical things here to think about, I guess this is sort of why we started setting up Superseed as well, was the gap that all of the incumbent players are finding is that everyone's built their own software for them, as we said, but with very distinct borders as to where that stops. So your insurance company software goes as far as your insurance company, your reinsurance broking software goes as far as your reinsurance broking company, and your reinsurance underwriting workflow, workbench pricing software goes as far as you, the reinsurer. But the gaps in the middle, the how do we exchange information between these parties, are a void that is currently filled by emails and spreadsheets.
Yeah.
So we've found ourselves with this need to take all of the hard work that's gone into crafting these quite unique and bespoke internal solutions, but for anybody to benefit from it, actually we have to export into the form of a spreadsheet, so that all of that ends up just being another spreadsheet that somebody has to deal with and rekey from, etc. Which is
and it's this recognition that nothing happens in isolation, really, right? So every claim is being paid from one party to another party. Every deal is the data around a deal is being organized by one party and shared to another party. Everything is working in this sort of overlap between these companies, but all their technology has been built like in these silos for that specific company, but it needs to be shared with other parties. Like everything needs to be shared. Not very few actions in our industry sort of happen in that bubble, barring maybe an underwriting pricing tool. Like they receive the data, they want to generate their view of that risk. That can happen in isolation, but the output of that, what they think the price should be, needs to go to the other part. Like it all has to happen in this sort of exchange flow, but all the tech has been built in these like isolated silos. As you said, they take it down in spreadsheets, then send someone else an update based on that spreadsheet.
Yeah. I think this is where deal with it, as we said, was one slogan, but we came up with a while ago the sort of phrase reinsurance that connects. Mm-hmm. I think on one of our videos it's reinsurance that connects, which is pretty, I feel like I'm offending the voice artist, but anyway, that's sort of the reason we came up with that saying, was because we felt like everything is so disconnected at the moment. It's as you say, every person to themselves, build your own software, and then everyone's on an island all alone, which is very sad. We'd much rather a place where you can give access to your information, the things you want to share, in a really smooth and easy way. But speaking of islands and other analogies, metaphors, re-entering the metaphorical landscape, I have some very sad news.
Tell me.
For me.
For you.
Cordy has held up the sign, and apparently, Jerad, you are the victor of our analogy battle.
Yes.
So my heart is breaking. You can probably hear it breaking. Oh no, are you ready? I've still got this prop. Hang on. It's the sound of
the heartbreak sound.
Sound of my heart breaking. And on that very sad note, it might be time to end. Do you want, unless you make it more cheerful, you can have a celebratory version of my deep disappointment that my building analogy just didn't cut the mustard for our friend Gordy.
I thought I liked it. I like your analogy quite a lot, actually, because it aligns with the build by rent components. I think it's easy to sort of use that as an analogy to sort of anchor in sort of how we're thinking about that. So I will give you kudos to that. I thought it was a very good analogy. People just love Apple unboxing videos on YouTube, and you can't compete against that.
Yeah, Cordy's got a Mac in front of him. He's clearly biased.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, cool. Well, what are we talking about next time, Jerad? Any ideas?
We have to wait and see.
All right. Stay tuned, folks, and we'll see you next time on the Reinsurance Podcast.
Dum dum. That's like the Law and Order SVU dum dum. That's not the Netflix one.
Da-da-da. Here it comes. See you soon, folks.